Welcome to A Better Choice Homestead. My name is Kelly. On my channel, I focus on food, growing it, preparing it, and preserving it. On Sundays, I like to do a garden or typically a food preservation method. On Tuesdays, I do a cook with me video, and on Fridays, it's all about freeze drying. Today is Tuesday, so welcome to another edition of Tasty Tuesday. Today I am going to be making tomato pie, and this is not the tomato pie that you are familiar with. I have a secret ingredient that is going to make this absolutely phenomenal. Now today I'm just going to be making the pie crust. I'm actually in my kitchen making Pop-Tarts for my guests. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the pie crust for the tomato pie, and then we will actually do the tomato pie in 1 to 2 days. But I cannot wait to share this with you. It is seriously mind-blowing. And because my guests are still here, I am doing a voiceover on this. This is right in the middle of the day and all of the kids are active, very vocal, running around. So we're just doing a voiceover. So I made a different pie crust recently for the Pop-Tarts that I just posted a video on recently. And it is a different recipe. So I'm showing a couple different ways to make pie crust. Both are good. On this one, I'm starting with 2.5 cups of all-purpose organic flour, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to be mixing everything together in my Vitamix food processor attachment just to make sure that all those dry ingredients get well mixed. Next, I'm adding 2 sticks of butter that I have cubed up into small pieces. This is a little bit different than the last pie dough recipe I did in that I'm not adding all of the butter all at once. I'm going to save about 1/4 to 1/3 of it to set aside just for a minute, because I want the butter that's in there to kind of be chopped up with the flour so that the flour clings to it and the remaining butter that goes in kind of stays on its own to really get flaky in the dough. Next, I'm adding 1/2 cup of ice cold water, and I am dropping that down the chute of the food processor in a steady stream while I'm running the blades. And after the water gets completely dropped in, I'm just going to continue to run the blades, and I'm watching the food processor. I'm watching the dough set up. I'm not looking for a dough ball. I'm just looking for complete incorporation of the ingredients. Now I'm ready to flour my board and then tip that dough mixture out onto the board. I'm not going to be kneading this dough. I don't want that butter to melt with the warmth of my hands or to be smushed too hard with over kneading of the dough. I'm not looking to form gluten in this. So I am really just going to be pressing it together into kind of a ball, I'm weighing the dough balls here just to make sure that they're both equal or relatively equal, so I know that they'll fit in my pie pan. And then I'm just going to be flattening these dough balls into a disc shape that I will wrap in some plastic, put in the refrigerator until I'm ready to use. You definitely want to refrigerate your dough after you get it into these disc shapes, because you want that butter to set back up into hard butter so it can do what it needs to do in the dough when it cooks. When you cook cold butter in dough, it actually releases steam, pushing apart the dough to create flaky, yummy layers. So now I am just getting some plastic wrap, and I'm just going to tightly wrap each of those dough balls and stick them in the refrigerator until I'm ready for use, till they're ready for use in a day or two. And if I don't use all of them, both of them, then the second one will actually go in the freezer for use in the next 6 months or so. All right, the pie crust has been in the refrigerator for about 24 hours now, and I'm going to get started on this pie. This recipe calls for 5 large tomatoes. I have small and medium tomatoes, so I'm using 9, and I'm just going to get these sliced up. It's going to be awkward because of my finger splints. I might end up taking these off, but just bear with me. So I'm just going to do a slice on here that's about a quarter of an inch thick. Now, tomatoes are obviously juicy, notoriously juicy. So I am going to be putting them on a baking sheet that is covered with some wire cooling racks and salt them. And as I roll out the pie crust, so I'm going to salt these, and while I'm rolling out the pie dough, these will lose some of their moisture. I do not want them to lose all of their moisture because of the secret ingredient I'm going to be using. So let me just quickly get these chopped up. And this one had a little brown spot on it, so I just cut that off. The rest of the tomato is fine. So you don't want these super thin, but you also don't want them super thick. So quarter of an inch is perfect. Got a little spot on this one too. I'm just going to cut that off. The pie pan that I use is pretty deep, so I usually do a little more than the recipe calls for, especially when it comes to the cheese. All right, with all those tomatoes sliced up, I'm just going to liberally put salt over the top of them. And that's going to help draw out some of the moisture. That's why it is on a baking sheet, to hold the moisture that comes off. As the tomatoes sweat out their juices, that's going to pull the salt off with it. So these are not going to be overly salty in the dish. All right, these are going to go into the compost, and we're going to roll out the dough. I only need one pie crust for this, so when I made the dough, it made two. We might end up making a second pie. This is a lot of tomatoes, we'll see. Again, the pie crust is pretty deep, but if we only use half of these, then I'll use the second pie crust to make the second pie. And otherwise, I'll just put that pie crust in the freezer for use in the future. So this is cold. We want it cold. We want the butter to remain intact in the pea-sized bits to make that crust flaky and delicious. My pie pan is it's a 9.5 inch diameter, but it is pretty thick. So I have this silicone baking mat, which I love. I've had this for about 10 years now. I got it on Amazon. I'm sure they still have it, but these rings are measured. So I'm gonna try rolling this out to about the 14-inch mark. So again, this is deep and it's flared at the top. So if I turn this pie pan upside down, I go out to about the 11.5-inch mark. So I'm gonna give about a good 2 inches extra to come up the side of this pan. All right, let's get this rolled out. These finger splints are a little annoying, but I'm gonna try to leave them on because I keep taking them off and I'm just hurting my finger even more. Now, cold pie dough is not easy to roll out, so I'm just gonna get it started and it's gonna inch its way out. And one of the nice things about this mat is that it is non-stick, so I don't have to use extra flour to get this rolled out. You just kind of want to work the edges, or at least this is how I do it. I am not a professional baker. Everything that I do in the kitchen, I taught myself. So I just have my ways of doing it, and I welcome all the suggestions that I get on my cooking videos. I really, really do. So if you have a trick for this that I am unaware of, I would love to hear it. I think that rolling out pie crust is will work, but worth it. I got a long way to go. The 14-inch mark is here, so we're only at the 9-inch mark so far. So I'm just starting in the center each time and either pulling it towards me or pushing away from me from the center. Trying to keep it, just go in a circle to keep it even all the way around. We're almost at the 12, so we're getting there. And I'm short, so I really have to get up here and put some muscle into it on my tippy toes. We're almost at the 13. We're getting there. All right, so it's a little thicker in some areas than in others. It's thinner over here than over here. So now I'm just gonna take my rolling pin, kind of stretch it this way a bit. I'm trying to go out to the 3rd ring all the way around on here, which is this darker red ring. Now you probably can't see that all too well, but I've got to stretch it out just a little bit more without going too thin in some areas. So I'm just kind of stretching out the edges here. So now we're covered on that ring about halfway through. And I definitely have some I can steal from this edge right here to kind of pull this way, because I've got about an inch here that I want to fill in this gap. So I'm putting more pressure on this than I am on this side and pulling it this way. There we go. All right, so how are we going to get this into the pie dish? Got my pie pan. I'm going to put it on here, and then I'm just going to flip this whole thing upside down like this. And then carefully peel the silicone mat away. And that's how I do it. So now I'm going to, this is not in the bottom of the pan. So I'm going to lift each edge and kind of push it in a little and just make sure that the edge of the pie is on the edge of the pan all the way around. So I'm lifting it into the center so that the dough sits on the bottom of the pan. There, now it's flat bottomed. Now I'm going to take my splints off for this. We're gonna make the crimps on the edge of the pie. So let me show you how I do that. All right, so all I'm going to do, I'm going to try to do this with some broken fingers here. And I'm just going to push that in and then pinch around it. There we go. I'm gonna pre-bake this pie crust for about 10, maybe 15 minutes. So I am gonna line this now with some parchment paper, and I'm gonna put some pie weights in here, which is just some uncooked pinto beans that I keep on hand to reuse as pie weights. I'm gonna crinkle this paper up. That's going to allow me to push it down in here snugly. I'm really just trying to cover the pie so it doesn't get brown in the oven. We don't want it browning before the pie cooks. We just want to kind of get the bottom of this pie crust to set up a little bit because the tomatoes are wet. So I'm just going to pour in the pie weights and we're going to pop into the oven for 10 to 15 minutes. These are my pie weights. And that is because we do not want the pie crust on the bottom kind of bubbling up. It just holds the pie flat on the bottom. All right, I'm gonna put this into the oven, 375 for 10 to 15 minutes. All this needed was 10 minutes in the oven. I'm just gonna lift the beans right out of here and I will pour those back into my mason jar where I keep them. But you can see our pie crust shrunk a little bit on this side. So note to self, for this pan, it's so big, I need to go more than 14 inches. Next time I'll go out to the 15-inch mark. And I just reuse these, so I just pour them right back in. I'm not gonna seal that because those are pretty warm. I'll just let those cool down and then put them away. I'm gonna go ahead and leave my oven on at 375 degrees so we can get this cooked up. And the pie crust is not cooked, but it has set. So I'm okay with how this looks. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the filling made up. All right, I've got half of a medium onion sliced thin into rings. I pre-chopped that because it's not pretty watching me chop, especially with my finger splints on. I'm going to be layering the tomatoes in the pie pan, alternating with the onions. I have a half a cup of mayonnaise, a half a cup of sour cream, a quarter cup of grated Parmesan cheese. I have a quarter teaspoon of black pepper and 1 teaspoon of salt in this container. I have 1 cup of cheddar cheese shredded and 1 cup, it's more than a cup, this is probably a cup and a half of the mozzarella cheese. Again, the pie pan is so big, I do a little bit extra on the cheese. So I'm gonna get the cheese and everything out here except for the basil. Sorry, I've got some fresh basil as well. Just picked that out of the garden. That's about 10 leaves. I'm gonna get everything into this bowl and we're gonna mix it all together. So we've got cheese and cheese. And this is organic cheese that I get from Azure Standard. More cheese, this is the Parmesan. Salt and pepper. And then I'm gonna go in with the mayo and the sour cream. And you might hear kids in the background. Trying not to do a voiceover on this one, but I still have my family here. And nap time is not going so well upstairs. All right, I'm just gonna get all of this mixed together. All right, I can set that aside for a minute. Now I'm gonna bring out my special ingredient here. I came up with this 2 years ago when I really wanted a tomato pie and it was winter. And tomatoes are just not good in the winter. It's not when they normally grow, it's grocery store, it's not from your garden. So it doesn't have a lot of flavor. So I thought, how can I infuse some amazing flavor into this pie? Now, I can do that one of 2 ways, and I'm gonna show you one way right now, but I'm also going to tell you another way. So let me get the secret ingredient. My secret ingredient is homegrown garden tomatoes that I have sliced to about the same thickness as these, and then put them in the dehydrator. So these are dehydrated tomatoes. I'm gonna lay these in the bottom of the pie pan. So these dehydrated tomatoes taste like sun-dried tomatoes. And I'm just going to put them across the bottom of the pie pan. These are some smaller pieces. I just want to get to some of the larger ones here. I'm being very, very liberal with these. I want the whole bottom of the pie covered. That's a nice big one. These are all different types of tomatoes, all different colors of tomato, which I think makes it fun inside the pie. So I've got some orange and some yellow and some red. This looks great. Now, these are dehydrated, so that's why I don't want the tomatoes completely sweated out. So as the pie bakes and the juices run out of these tomatoes, they are going to be rehydrating these dehydrated tomatoes, but these dehydrated tomatoes will still have that sun-dried tomato flavor. If I didn't have these, I also have tomato powder. So freeze-dried tomatoes powdered down, I could just mix in here. You're gonna get the same flavor. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just start layering in these tomatoes on top of the dehydrated ones. I'm gonna stick with the bigger ones, you know, just the bigger sliced ones on the bottom. I'm gonna take a couple of these basil leaves and try tearing them and dropping them on. And then some of these sliced onion rings. And one of my guests said they're not too fond of, you know, big pieces of onion, so I'm gonna go easy on those. And now I'm gonna just keep layering this until I get to the height that I want for the pie. It's hard to tear this without using the splints. I don't want to use the splints. I'm just going to do a rough chop. Maybe we won't have enough tomatoes. That's probably not enough tomatoes to do a full pie. So we'll probably stop here and do something else with those tomatoes. You know what? I'll probably make a caprese salad out of those with some fresh basil from the garden, some fresh mozzarella. Oh, that'll be good. And yes, this is, believe it or not, this is me going easy on onions. There's still a lot, I know. That looks gorgeous, doesn't it? Just let me get the last of the basil in there. And then I'm just gonna spread this mixture as best I can over the top of this pie. And as the pie cooks, it's going to filter down all the way through the pie. I'm trying not to put too much in any one spot because this doesn't spread all that easily. So I want to make sure that there is some everywhere. And now that I know that I have it everywhere, I'm going to go ahead and just layer it over the top until I have it all on top of the pie. This looks great. This is going to go into the preheated 375-degree oven for 30 minutes. About 9 minutes left on the pie, and the edges are starting to get brown. So I am going to go ahead and just use one of my pie crust coverers. You can also use foil because we still have 9 minutes left and we don't want the crust to burn. There we go. Back in for 9 minutes. And I do have it on a baking sheet just in case it bubbles up and spills out while it's cooking. It also makes it a lot easier to carry it that way. Exactly 30 minutes later, and we are going to pull that pie out of the oven. and it looks amazing. Let me bring you in for a close-up. All right, I'm just gonna take my ring off here. So the crust continued to cook, but it is not burnt at all, but the top of this cheesy goodness is golden brown and looks absolutely delicious. This is screaming hot. I am gonna let this cool down for a good 20 or 30 minutes before I slice into it. You can see, or I can see in here, that the cheese is still bubbling, everything is still cooking, so I'm gonna let this sit. I'll slice it up, put it on a plate, give it a taste test in a few minutes. Cool enough now to slice and try it out, and it smells so good. My whole house smells like this tomato pie. I'm just gonna cut one slice here. See if we can get that out in one piece onto the plate. And have to take the splints off. All right, let's give this a try. We've got layers of tomatoes in here, including my secret ingredient, dehydrated tomatoes, which are now softened from the moisture coming out of the fresh tomatoes. That is so delicious. And again, those dehydrated tomatoes, just take this over the top. If you've had tomato pie before, you know how good this is. But now you can have summer fresh tasting tomato pie any day of the year by using either dehydrated sliced tomatoes at the bottom or adding a little bit of dehydrated or freeze-dried tomato powder in with the filling mix. Thank you so much for joining me again in my kitchen. My name is Kelly. You're at A Better Choice Homestead, and I do hope you come back and visit again soon.